Okay, I've started recording. Welcome to the Azure Provider under SIG Cloud Provider subproject meeting. The first attempt. It sure is. It's hard to say. It's our first attempt at having this meeting at this time, and I'm very happy to see that we have a number of people joined. We'll ignore that 5 of us are in the same room together. So, in this meeting, this is conducted under the CNCF Code of Conduct, and in summary it means be good people to each other. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the internet, so don't say anything you wouldn't want your mom to hear. With that, I am going to paste the agenda and notes document into the chat and ask if anybody wants to volunteer to be the, oh, I already did that. That's nice. Please add your name to the attending and ask if anybody wants to volunteer to be the note taker for this session.
I can note take.
Oh, thank you, Stephen.
So I think it'd be great if we took an opportunity. We've got some new faces on the call, and we've also got some new faces that may be new to some people and not others. So maybe we should go around the room and introduce ourselves real quick. So I guess we can go first.
Since you've already started speaking, go for it.
I'm already rambling. So hi, my name is Stephen Augustus. I am one of the former chairs of SIG Azure, now one of the sub-project owners for Provider Azure under SIG Cloud Provider. Also one of the SIG PM chairs and SIG Release chair. So.
Hey, and I'm Craig Peters. I am also a co-owner of this sub-project under SIG Cloud Provider. I'm a PM at Microsoft and working on lots of open source stuff with the team here. And we are several in the room, so we'll just go around the room real quick for anybody who remote will then join there.
Yeah, I'll go. Hi, I'm Cecile. I also work at Microsoft with Craig, and I'm an engineer working on the upstream team for a number of open source projects, including AKS Engine, now working a little bit on Cluster API, and et cetera. Do you want to go, Sertaj?
Hi everyone, my name is Sertaj. I'm an engineer on the upstream team.
Hi, I'm Rita. Here on the team as well.
Okay, I'm just going to use the participant list to get an order. So Ace, would you introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I also work at Microsoft. I do not work on the upstream team. I am more of a Kubernetes user within Microsoft, I guess.
Perfect, thank you. And Sid.
Hi, I'm Sid from Melbourne. I'm a Kubernetes fan and mostly working on EKS, and that's it.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to have you join us. Jack.
Hello. I just got off barbecue duty, so.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for joining. You work at Microsoft. You also work on the upstream team. Thank you. Hey, Vaco. Am I saying your name correctly?
We can't hear anything.
Yeah, I think you're on twice, so you may have mic issues.
Looks like he may be Ismail, yes. If you cannot find the unmute, feel free to speak up later if you like. If not, we'll move on. Or you can introduce yourself in chat if that's easier. But welcome nonetheless. Okay. So now that we've got intros out of the way, hope to hear from Ismail later. So unfortunately, we don't have either Andy or Peng Fei on the line. So it's hard to do an update on the movement of the Azure cloud provider out of tree at this point. Do you have something to add, Reed?
I mean, am I speaking through the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, one update is Ernest, who actually should be on the call. He's been adding E2E for the Azure disk or Azure file CSI driver right now.
Azure file?
Azure file
it's
and
actually
Azure disk?
both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think he's doing it for file first. But that's one of the blockers.
Yeah, that's great.
So he's working on that, and he's going to continue to do the rest of them.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll knock out each one.
And I know that Ping Fei has been working on ways to resolve the API throttling challenge.
Right. So that's the partially the ID.
IMDS.
IMDS.
See what I did there?
I see. Sorry, we're jokesters today. So for context for people who are on the call,
Yes.
The goal overall is there are several providers that exist, what we call in-tree Kubernetes, right? So in-tree Kubernetes is essentially anything that you would consider to be within the Kubernetes repo, right? So we kind of have, from the start of the project, we've kind of had something of a mono repo situation going on. We've done a lot of work over the last few years to start to trim some of that fat, migrate them out into, migrate various sections of code out into their own repos. Recent things are, some of the volume providers. kubectl is going to be one of the ones that are soon coming out of in-tree. kubeadm is also something that they're pulling out. But on our side, one of the larger efforts is our side, as in cloud providers overall. I'm at VMware. I just have to be at Microsoft today. Is detangling all of the in-tree cloud provider code from the in-tree Kubernetes. So that's very involved because of the ways that we've coupled ourselves to the code base. So some of those ways are the credential providers, the way that we handle essentially node identity, and so that affects the way that we bring up clusters. There's also what else? The storage, some other stuff that we've handled in the past. The things that are in package util mount. So basically, we've been over the past few cycles figuring out exactly what requirements the in-tree cloud providers have that are pinned to all of the in-tree code. And we've gotten quite a bit of the way there, and I think we have like 3 or 4 real things left to pull out. Before that would then enable us to move from staging / legacy cloud providers, Azure, blah, 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 into Kubernetes SIG's cloud provider, Azure, right? And that, getting the code out of tree allows us to move a lot faster, not be, build our own suite of tests around that code, be able to version independently from the Kubernetes versioning, which happens on essentially a quarterly basis, and lots of other sweet things that I'm probably forgetting. But yeah, that's the context for the progress report around the end-to-end test.
So the summary of that should go in the notes is basically end-to-end testing is being set up specifically around those things. Where are we with respect to
the API throttling?
Yeah, exactly.
I think last time I checked, I think we're still waiting for the CAP to be approved, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm looking at issue 124. Here, let me just paste it in this thing so everyone can see.
This is the tracking issue?
That's right. So I think the caps for the changes that Ping Fei wanted, I think that still needs to be talked about at the next cloud provider meeting, which is, I think, on Wednesday, right?
Yes.
So I feel like we're going to be out of pocket for that.
Right, because that's during the face-to-face for cluster API.
Yeah.
Conflicts.
Yeah, that's actually a bad timing because Teams can't join. Yeah, it's like early in the morning. I mean, it's like 10 o'clock or something.
Okay, so maybe we can proxy his voice and figure out what needs to be brought to the meeting. Hopefully bring feedback back to him. Maybe we can try that.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, but we're 2 weeks out then, an extra 2 weeks.
I don't know, but also the CAP is very Azure specific, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Like other people don't have this policy.
Okay, so I'm wondering, so context for people on the call who are not aware of what KEPs are. KEPs are Kubernetes enhancement proposals. These are basically the canonical resource for proposing change to the project, right? So basically you type up a KEP. It includes your fun table of contents, the release sign-off checklist, which is a set of things that the release team expects you to have in place for us to consider an enhancement. An enhancement is a large body of work in the project, as opposed to a feature, which is something that you can potentially execute on within one cycle. So an enhancement can be composed of multiple features. But anyhow, this is basically one to describe an instance metadata service, right? So a way to describe the attributes of a node. And the reason this is important is because this comes up for, let's also link the KEP.
Yeah, I'm adding it in right now.
All right, so I'm popping the KEP in the chat, and we'll pop it on the notes as well. So this is essentially like, how do we describe a node, right? And the reason this is important is because by standard, the way we were describing nodes was based on information that we were getting from the cloud provider plus I forgot exactly how it works.
File.
Yeah, it's a file plus, it can be a file, but it can also be inferred from the metadata service in Azure. But varying cloud providers have the ability to infer information about a node, like external IP addresses or something, right? From the respective metadata services, right? So the thought behind this is like, well, what if we could create a metadata service that is generally useful, right? Which allows us to, which if we use that, we could potentially reduce the API requests to each cloud provider. So that's in discussion. It seems like, of course, this is one I'm assigned to review. Okay, so I think we're kind of in a hold'em pattern right there. We need to come to the SIG cloud provider meeting, but we need to get appropriate context from Peng Fei about where this is at.
Yep.
So 2 weeks out, probably.
Looks like that. So do we need to set up a separate out-of-band meeting for that discussion? Because obviously this time didn't work for Peng Fei.
And that time won't work.
That time won't work for him. So it sounds like there's an action item to figure out a KEP-specific discussion.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a mailing list thread.
Okay, that sounds like a good thing to do. Asynchronous?
Async.
Who wants to take the AI to kick off that thread?
I guess I can.
You want me to kick it off?
Yeah, go crazy.
I will do that.
And so we are planning, the community is planning for cloud providers to be out of tree for 118, I believe, which means we have to start buttoning up the last of these bits. So IMDS, the Azure file and Azure disk bits for CSI and the credential provider, right? I think that's all of it.
The list is all on that issue, actually.
Yeah, it's
Okay, all right.
issue. It's a really good issue.
Yes.
So any questions on that, especially from the non-Microsoft people?
Ace has his hand up. Ace,
Okay,
go ahead.
I am a Microsoft person, but I have questions about this.
Bob?
So, I mean, it looks like those three, I mean, the disk file and IMDS, like, if you're not using PVC, like, how bad is the throttling actually? Because I'd played around with this and I'd been asking people, like, you know, what's the state of using Cloud Controller Manager with Azure? And, like, on the clusters that I'd spun up, it seemed okay. But people were like,
there are two separate issues, right? So the PVC stuff is yeah, that concerns file and disk, but it's more so like, how do we use the CSI implementations of those, right?
I see.
Because right now there are storage implementations in tree for Azure, right?
Is that the impact though? The PVC, like, am I misunderstanding that?
So so the API throttling is not for the PVCs, right? That's for I think large scale clusters and trying to get information from multiple nodes in a 1,000-node cluster.
I guess I'm asking, like, given that list of issues, like, what does that actually translate to in terms of kind of readiness of CCM? It seems like actually
the answer, it seems like, is it's close. There's these things left blocking. You know, some of them are non-trivial.
Yeah, so I think maybe if you looked 3 cycles ago, the list might have been 15 items or so, right? So we're getting close. Is like tiny ta-da emoji.
Yeah, that was definitely my impression. I just wasn't sure the missing pieces were, I guess, and how big they were. But thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. Hope that helped.
And I think the API throttling issue is actually more along like a bigger issue than just this in-tree, out-of-tree thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it's a actual
Is it something
blocker
that we can punt?
That's
actually maybe worth that.
I don't know if that's going to be solved anytime soon, to be honest.
We should talk with Cal about that. Yeah.
I mean, Cal would know this, so we've talked about this. So that's why.
Is there another action?
I don't think this should be a blocker.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is probably something we.
So do you want to? So should I add that to the thread?
Yes.
Question of whether or not this is a blocker.
Sure.
Okay.
And sorry for the goofiness, by the way. Like, we've been in a room for a few hours and we're all
a little punchy.
There's no windows here.
There's no windows.
Dinner.
Okay. So next then is, I put on here, it's just an idea of something to discuss with the whole group, is the thing that we talked about with the cluster API kind of core code provider. And
how much can we give away?
This is all open.
It's all over,
right? So it's there's some discussion of aligning the core code that uses the Azure Go SDK between the cluster API provider for Azure and the cloud provider for Azure.
Yeah, so essentially what we want to do is identify common abstractions for Azure resources, right? And kind of prevent ourselves from doing the work over, right?
Yeah.
So, so Ping, Fei, and Andy are two of the primary maintainers on the cloud provider Azure work, and I'm like the primary maintainer for the cluster API Azure stuff. And like, there are common patterns that come up over and over, like, how do I create a load balancer, or how do I create resource groups, or or security groups, or so on and so forth, right? There are common things that you need to do in Azure, and it's starting to look like it makes sense to not repeat the work, right? So figuring out what a common abstraction layer is for that code, and then leveraging that in both the cloud provider and the cluster.
Yeah, and these two are two that we identified that we're working on that could use some of that reusing, but this could also, we could see this being used in other repos as well, like cluster autoscaler that are doing things with Kubernetes on Azure. So it's not limited to those two repos.
And I mean, this becomes generally useful for not just Kubernetes code, but think if you have the opportunity to use use Azure SDKs in different venues, say building Terraform modules, right? If we can define, again, this common abstraction layer for the Azure SDK, I think it would be generally useful to both the Kubernetes community and everyone else, right? That's what we've been noodling on for some time now.
Any questions from the community about that? Checking for hands raised. Don't see any hands raised. Okay, let's move on to the next item then.
I mean, does it sound like something that's useful? Like it sounds like, to me at least, it sounds useful.
I like the idea of not having, different bugs in different places. Like, I like the idea of you fix something and it works everywhere.
Exactly.
Or if you break it.
Or you break it.
Break it everywhere.
This is the Oh, I was thinking it. I just was going to try to say things in the positive, which is unlikely. I'm being recorded and published to YouTube. I want to have the positive.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah, I think, big part of it is also like saving engineering cycles, right? If we can all be going towards the same goals at the same time, using the same tools, then we'll all move faster together. Right?
Yeah. Note to self: I'm never doing this meeting in the same room with us again.
Challenge accepted.
Okay. Next item is repo migration. So, Stephen, you added that.
Yeah. So this is kind of some holdover from the cloud provider consolidation. So essentially, a few things that we've already executed on for the cloud provider migration. Some things that are like minutia that's not necessarily interesting to people who consume the CCM or KCM code. Changing labels on repos, making sure that owner files are, people who have the rights to approve certain areas of code are changed. Changing meeting invites, right? So meeting invites, changing mailing list names. So like a lot of the hygiene that's involved in either introducing or deprecating a SIG is some of the stuff that we were working on over the last quarter. Now we're at the place where we need to do a routine change, which is moving the cloud provider Azure code from Kubernetes, github.com/Kubernetes/cloud provider Azure to Kubernetes, github.com/Kubernetes SIGs/cloud provider Azure. Right. So Kubernetes SIGs, that org in GitHub is the canonical location for the code that is produced from any SIG, right? There is a difference between core code and SIG code, and a lot of it is kind of vestigial Kubernetes stuff, but we want to try to make sure that we are being hygienic here, and so new cloud providers that have been introduced in the Kubernetes SIGs org, and we need to make sure that we're also doing the same, being consistent.
So who has those action items? Are they on the project board for that?
It is, I think it's on a mental project board right now. It probably needs to be on a real project.
Which was why I added that next thing for.
Yeah. So I think we wrote it down in our second half planning at some point. And so yeah, what needs to happen there is I feel like it's probably appropriate to rip the Band-Aid off sooner rather than later. We have in terms of like adoption for, the out-of-tree cloud provider, the out-of-tree cloud provider is essentially vendoring in the current in-tree provider, right? And like right now, before the in-tree provider becomes out-of-tree, it's probably the right time to pull the trigger on that.
Mm-hmm.
So we need someone who has repo admin, well, That's everyone, really. Rather, that's anyone on the GitHub administration team. Since we're migrating from so the GitHub administration team is a sub-project within SIG contributor experience that has all of the keys to the castle for the various Kubernetes orgs. So that's Kubernetes, Kubernetes SIGs, Kubernetes client, Kubernetes CNI.
Contribute.
Yeah, Kubernetes security. So all of those orgs fall under the GitHub administration team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we'd essentially be moving from one of ours to one of ours, right? That move shouldn't be too labor intensive. What will be the thing to watch out for is weirdness that you might see, and if anyone has had the enjoyment of like importing logRS, right, the Syrupson library, where there was a change in like the from uppercase to lowercase, and that broke a bunch of imports. So, you know,
somebody meaningfully cleared their throat, I assume.
So yeah, stuff like that you need to watch out for. So we're not going to be changing. This is not a renaming like any of the Azure things from uppercase to lowercase, but it will be changing some imports. So we expect some breakage on people that depend on the out-of-tree provider, but we don't expect too much breakage because we don't know many people who are depending on it. Right.
So those are all good cautionary things. What are the AIs? That's what I'm kind of getting to. Is who
announce it, do it. I think
I am not a member of the GitHub.
Yes, right. So there is a process by which you can request the GitHub administration team help you out with stuff. And within the Kubernetes org repo, there is, so that's github.com/Kubernetes/org if you want to check that repo out. And that repo, we have this cool tool called Parabolus, or Parabolus or something, I don't know how it's pronounced. But it contains the configs for all of our repos, right? So that is from like repo, that's like from org settings to repo settings to the teams that live in our GitHub orgs. All of that information is contained within, most of that information is contained within Kubernetes org, right? We also have these great issue templates. One of the issue templates is a repo creation or migration. So we fill out one of these, specify the repos, and Bob's your uncle, right? So this should be fairly simple, since usually one of the things that hang us up is like making sure that a repo conforms to Kubernetes standards, right? It has owners files, has security contacts. The imports within the repo are compliant to CNCF licensing policies, so on and so forth, and then finally that the migrator, which is some member of the GitHub administration team, has admin access to the repo. Because they have admin access everywhere, this won't be a problem, right? And because we've already got the owners and security contacts and all that good stuff set up, this should be fairly smooth, he says, last word.
He says. So then, who should fill out the issue, and who should?
I can fill out the issue. I can fill out the issue. You can shoot an email to the Kubernetes provider Azure list. So for those of you who have been using the Azure list, please note that the list name has changed from Kubernetes SIG Azure to Kubernetes provider Azure. So again, this is part of the minor cosmetic hygiene thingy that we have been doing over the past quarter. So an email out to that list, as well as probably Kubernetes dev, just to make sure we have a wide audience.
Yep.
And then we can execute on that. We can have a short lazy consensus period to pull out any issues. I would say we can do 72 hours. We could do a full week. But I don't think it needs to be super long. If there were more people dependent on that repo, I would say longer. But I think 72.
I think 72 is fine.
So any questions about that stuff?
None, no hands raised.
Exciting times.
Yes, it is.
All right, so we are just, we are a minute over, but I think the last one that we want to cover is project tracking, right?
Yep.
So a lot of the stuff that we mentioned, and you'll see occasionally on these meetings that there is there's kind of a fuzzy line between some of the cloud provider Azure stuff and some of the cluster API Azure stuff. That has been done purposely, but what we need to do is make sure that everything that we're thinking about internally at Microsoft or that Microsoft is thinking about internally. It feels weird. I'm here and I'm not here. Is properly tracked upstream, right? So moving into 117, cleaning up any project tracking boards that we're working on. So we have the SIG Azure board, which I can find, and also the cluster API board. The cluster API board is a repo specific one. Might consider turning.
I'm putting it in the notes.
Okay, cool. But yeah, cleaning up those boards, moving into the 117 cycle. That's really it.
And so should we make the next instance of this meeting kind of a working meeting for grooming and all doing that cleanup?
We have to choose the meeting that has the most people. I think would probably be appropriate. So that might be next meeting, actually.
Okay. Well, we have 8 participants today, and then we'll see what we have next session and identify if we need to do a separate one then.
Cool. So question for the class, did we feel that this was a reasonable meeting time? Was this more useful than the standard, 9 a.m. before on Wednesdays time?
I think, well, we can do another doodle. Yes.
Was there anyone in this meeting that was on a time zone that prevented them from coming to the 9 a.m. one? Or is this just because this is the first one that's happened in a while?
I don't know, Sid.
Both.
I think it's both.
Both. But Sid, you said you were in Australia, or? So this would have been difficult for you before.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm straight in Melbourne. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
I'm very happy about that. I don't know, did we lose? Yes, we lost the other person who had joined and I didn't see.
Ace, where are you based?
Seattle. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I just am really bad at
This sounds like Ace based.
Yeah.
All right, so it sounds like this was useful. So at least one person, which is a start.
Which is a great start.
So we'll keep plugging at it. So the meetings alternate times every 2 weeks. One is an APAC friendly, which is this slot.
It's not quite every 2 weeks. It's
every
twice a month.
Okay. Oh, semi-month.
So yes.
All right.
So it's close to every other. It turns out it was harder to code everything with the time changes.
Calendars, am I right?
It wasn't the calendar, it was the GitHub tools, but it was our tooling for that. Anyway, thank you all for joining. I am going to stop the recording. Bye, and we'll hope to see you guys in a couple of weeks. And I will post this to the YouTube channel as soon as I can. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Craig and Stephen.
Bye.